Yo, 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 what is going on? It is the Crazy Writer right here, right now, back with chapter 23 of my Invaders in Fanfiction. Oh boy, this is it. This is what we've all been waiting for. 2 more milestones in one gorgeous chapter. That's right, we have, after all this time, finally made it to the halfway point. Oh, we're halfway there. Not only that, we have also reached the 1 year point. What? That's right, the first chapter video of this story went up in the middle of May 2020. And this chapter, chapter 23, goes up, or has gone up, in the beginning of May 2021. So, okay, the 1 year chapter is more like the next chapter, but I really wanted to celebrate halfway and 1 year at the same time. And I know what you're thinking. If the halfway falls on the same time as the 1 year, does that mean it's going to take another whole year for all the chapters to be out? Is it going to be 2 whole years for this thing? Well, not necessarily, because, as none of you recall, I took a bunch of weeks off, I think back in November 2020, after I had the virus. And I haven't really taken any breaks since then, other than like a week here or there. And yes, I'm pooped. But if we keep going at the pattern that we're going at, and we don't hit any more major roadblocks such as the aforementioned, then by my calculations, the final chapter should be out by about March 2022. So it's not 2 whole years, it's 1 year and 10 months. Oh boy! But alright, chapter 23. Let's do this. You remember the previous great chapter, Silence? Yep, it's another one of those. So then sit back, relax, and enjoy it all, right here, right now. Chapter 23. My Abduction. The crisp, windy air was rich with the smell of rain. It had done just that the previous night. The rain made the land muddy and slippery. Mother and I were out walking, and I was splashing in the cold, muddy puddles up ahead of her. The rest of the pack were a good distance ahead of us. Mother and I always liked to take our leisurely time while moving about the territory. This annoyed the alphas, but they let it slide because I was usually too energetic to be around the others when they weren't playing. I always knew I was a little different from the other wolves, but I also knew that I was one of them. My mother didn't care that I grew up a bit slower than her other pups. She loved me, just the same as any mother loved her pup. I did my best to behave like the others. Heck, I didn't know how else to behave. It was all I knew. I waited my turn for meals like everyone else. I caught rodents when I could and gave them to Mother once in a while. A few I'd give to the alphas as a token that they would accept. I'd play with the other young wolves, and they happily let me play with them. It wasn't perfect, of course. Some nights we'd go hungrier than others. Some nights I could see the others protected by their thick fur, while I remained cold and had to snuggle up to my mother's fur. In the summertime, we'd all experience the mosquitoes and the ticks together. In the hot sun, my skin would burn and peel if I spent too long in the bright light. The others never had this problem, but they did seem to overheat easier than I did. Mother would lick my burning red skin with her big tongue to ease the stinging pain. Like I said, it wasn't perfect, but I wouldn't have had it any other way. I had pup friends. I had a mother who loved and looked after me. I had 2 strong alphas leading and protecting the pack that I was part of. Before the snowfall, our pack had encountered a large moose. All the adults fought bravely while us pups stayed hidden. The moose was eventually chased off, but not before kicking our alpha male at the time in the head. killing him. We all mourned and howled for him all through that night. By the next nightfall, our new alpha was established, and that's who is leading us now. My mother was originally alpha female up until my father died. After that, her rank dropped. I aspired to be just like her, so caring and sweet, yet so brave and strong. We walked along in the thinning, muddy woods. After a good hike, we were joined by a cliff that held the river just beneath it. The cliff wasn't frighteningly high, about as tall as some of the smaller trees around us. I bounded towards the cliff and started sniffing at the river and the fish below. I heard my mother give a warning whimper to be careful near the edge. I whined back in reassurance. We continued following the scent of the rest of the pack, with the cliff and river by our side. I was trotting only a few paws away from the edge, and Mother was diagonally behind me. My back left paw landed on the mud, which then slipped out from under me. Before I knew it, I was clinging to the edge of the cliff. I started whimpering, crying, and howling for my wolf mother. I howled for her to save me, and saw her suddenly in front of me. Mother grabbed me by the neck in her strong jaws and tossed me inland. I landed on my side and looked up, just in time to see the land start to give out beneath my mother's weight. Her eyes were filled with a terror that I rarely saw within them. Mother started to sink down the edge of the cliff. She whimpered and whined and pawed at the mud that began staining her silver fur brown. I rushed towards her as she slipped all the way off the cliff. I whined loudly as I watched her splash into the rocky water below. I watched the water carefully, waiting to see her resurface. I saw nothing, no sign that she was coming up. I started following the flow of the river, watching closely. Come on, Mother, come back up. Let me know you're okay. You're okay, I know you are. Don't leave me, Mother. Don't leave me. I ran blindly with tears in my eyes. I ran along the river. I howled for help, howled for the rest of the pack, howled for my mother. I ran and howled until I tripped on my own front paws, landing face first in the mud. I stayed on the ground, up to my nose in mud. I sobbed and I whined. My mother was gone, just like that. Gone. I watched my father die at the hoof of a moose only a few moons ago, and now my mother was at the bottom of this river. Because of me. It was my fault she was gone. If I would have been more careful on the edge of the cliff. Death was not foreign to the pack. Newborn pups died all the time. Wolves grew sick and old and died. But this was my fault. It was all my fault. I didn't see or hear the rest of the pack at all. I was alone. Alone with death lingering in the air. Most of the world seemed silent. Only the rushing sound of that horrible river found its way to my ears. Birds had been singing and chirping only moments before. Now they were silenced. Even the wind that was so wild before was holding its breath. I sobbed and whined for a good long while. After plenty of sobbing, I slowly lifted myself from the mud. I shook the top layer of mud from my bare skin and looked back down at the river. Tears dribbled from my eyes and from my nose. I sat with my hind legs and started howling mournfully. A howl of grief and sorrow filled the forest around me. I became deaf to everything but my own howl. I howled longer and louder than I have ever howled before. I howled until it became tiresome to howl, and then I howled some more. I lowered my head and ceased howling when I truly no longer could. I finally turned away from the river and attempted to track the rest of my family. I hadn't traveled 20 paces when I heard a noise. I stopped in my tracks and looked around, my ears perked and my eyes wide. Then I saw it. A creature was hunched low to the ground. I knew this creature. I'd seen them before from a great distance. Bears and moosers and other wolves were deadly, but this creature was to be avoided completely, for no wolf or other animal of the forest could ever defeat them in battle. These creatures had two main forms of communication. They communicated with their mouths, with others of their kind nearby. This wasn't unlike the birds in the trees talking with one another. Their other form of communication involved a sort of instrument that could be heard throughout an entire forest. This instrument communicated with others that were much further away. It let other creatures know that they were dangerous and to stay away. These instruments made noises like thunder that were fatal. This creature tried to use its oral communications towards me, but I couldn't understand any of it. I couldn't see the thunder device on him at all, as he held out one of his front paws in my direction. I arched my back and started growling at the horrible smelling creature. If Mother was still here, she'd be protecting me, but now I was on my own and had to protect myself. The creature kept making a noise with its teeth and lips that sounded like a heavy wind blowing through the leaves of a thick tree. Shh, shh. The monster took a small step closer, and I took a half step back. I peeled my lips back further and growled louder, warning him to stay back. He didn't listen. He just kept making little sounds with his mouth that made no sense to me. Surely he could understand what a growl meant. Most creatures did. I had to show him that I wasn't playing around. He took another step closer, and I leaped at the monster. He was so surprised that he fell back, and I landed on his chest. I bit down on the creature's neck, right over his windpipe. However, before I could do too much damage, I was pulled away by another set of arms. It was another monster. He had brought more to our forest and territory. How many were there? Hundreds, I was sure of it. I struggled for my life against the strong body that began carrying me away. I kicked and snarled and tried to bite at my captors. I howled, I barked, I whined for the pack to come stop them. My voice filled the entire forest that soon came to an end. In a dirt clearing, with a wide dirt path, there sat some sort of large mechanical monster. The first creature opened up the back of the monster, and the other threw me inside. The back area I was in was small and stunk like smoke and the tobacco plant. The two creatures closed up the back of the monster, and I was trapped. I kept howling and pawing at the back door while the two creatures sat in the front of the monster. The area I was in and the area they were in were separated with some sort of barred barrier. The monster we were in started growling, and I whimpered to show I was harmless. Then I heard them. The pack was barking for me. I looked out the clear barrier on the back of the monster to see the pack running towards us. I barked back in response and pawed at the barrier some more. But then the monster started moving, carrying me further and further away from my pack. They continued running after me, but they just weren't fast enough to catch up to this monster. I pawed harder and whined loudly as I saw my family disappearing in the distance. I continued whimpering long after they were gone, and then slid my paws down the clear barrier. I curled up on the floor of the monster's belly, terrified of what was in store for me. Surely they would slaughter me and devour my flesh. That wasn't right. Wolves didn't get eaten. Wolves did the eating of other creatures. What were these monsters interfering with the delicately balanced food chain? No, I wasn't going down without a fight. That's not what wolves do. I got up from my spot by the door and jumped at the bars that separated me and the creatures. I barked and snarled and tried to reach my paws through the bars to scratch at the creatures. My arms were short, but the space was just small enough to claw at one of the creature's ears. He barked in pain and held his ear with his paw. He turned towards me and barked something at me, probably a warning or a threat. I wasn't backing down. I continued growling and reaching for him again, but he moved out of my reach. I looked at the other creature who was holding a circle attached to the monster. I reached my paw towards him, but the other barked a warning and he moved out of reach without even looking at me. The two continued to sit just out of reach of my paws throughout the entire ride. I tried several other times to harm them, but gave up when I realized it was no use. After that, I went to try to escape the monster by slamming my body against the walls and the clear barrier. The creatures kept barking something at me, but I wouldn't listen to them even if I could understand them. This went on for what seemed like forever, trying to break through, trying to chew through whatever I was in. During this time, I figured out that this monster I was in wasn't alive because it showed no signs of pain, even when I bit my hardest. Instead, this was some sort of transporting containment chamber. After I did all that I possibly could, I grew too tired to continue and I dropped to my belly. Not only was I tired, I was also hungry. I hadn't eaten since yesterday at all. I was so weak, so desperate. If these monsters didn't intend to kill me, surely they wouldn't mind feeding me a little. Once I had enough energy to get up, I approached the bars once again. The creature that wasn't holding the weird circle kept a close eye on me. Instead of going to attack them, I whimpered for food like me and the other pups would when wanting to be fed. The creature didn't seem to understand at first, but then he pulled out some sort of soft container and opened it. I could smell some turkey on the inside of the container and started shaking my tailbone and licking my lips in excitement. He held up a turkey leg and I started whimpering louder and begging for him to hand it over. He finally slipped the leg through the bars and dropped it in front of me. I picked up the meat and bone and carried it to one of the back corners of the transporter chamber to eat. I feasted like it would be my last meal, which is how the pack and I always ate. You never know when you're going to eat next, so you have to eat when you can. Not long after I finished, I fell into a well-needed sleep. So, that's how it happened. Okay, I'm starting to catch on. I got you, babe. You got me? Did you get me? Let's hope so, because second half of the story, here we come. Then I will see you little darlings next time. And remember, keep your crazy.